The night I overheard my son-in-law whisper that I was a burden, I stood in the darkened hallway clutching my breath and realized I was about to change all of our lives forever. His voice carried through the thin walls of my Jacksonville ranch house, so matter-of-fact, so dismissive, that it slashed at my memory of every meal I had made at that kitchen table. In that moment between his casual cruelty and my next heartbeat, I saw the future stretching before me in threads of betrayal, legal documents, and a family legacy I had built with calloused hands. The shock pulsed with a strange clarity, because I knew this story was no longer about a mother helping her grown children, but a woman reclaiming the keys to her own home and heart. Before I reveal how I blew the inheritance my daughter and her husband thought they deserved, let me introduce myself the way I should have from the start. My name is Diane. I am 73 years old, and I have lived a life defined by respect, independence, and a stubborn refusal to be treated as disposable. I want you to listen closely and think about your own family as I tell my story, and in the comments tell me where you are watching from and what chores you are doing while listening. As the minutes tick by and you hear the cracks widen in my marriage and motherhood, you will find yourself leaning closer, wondering how far I would go to protect my dignity. My life had been quiet since my husband Henry passed away. A slow rhythm of coffee at dawn, tending my small garden, and volunteering at the local library 3 days a week. Henry and I married in 1987 and bought our 3-bedroom ranch house just north of downtown Jacksonville for $78,000, back when interest rates were like a roller coaster. We raised our daughter Amanda in that house, painting her room lemon yellow when she was 3, hosting pool parties and long Thanksgiving dinners, and paying off the mortgage over 30 years. I worked as a school secretary for 22 years, and Henry was a lineman for Florida Power and Light, always coming home smelling like creosote and sun, his hands nicked by cables. Our life was simple but full, and we always prided ourselves on living within our means, saving a little each paycheck, and teaching Amanda to budget by giving her allowance in envelopes. After Henry died of a heart attack 7 years ago at age 60, I received his modest pension and our savings, which together allowed me to stay in the house and live comfortably. I didn't need luxury. I needed security and memories, and I had both until Amanda met Brian and the fault lines in our relationship began to show. Amanda is 34 now and works as a physical therapist. She has always been bright, compassionate, and fiercely independent, but she has a blind spot when it comes to handsome charmers. Brian came into her life at a Jacksonville Jaguars tailgate, all smiles and business cards, selling custom home security systems and bragging about flipping houses with quick mortgages. He was nice enough at first, always bringing a bottle of wine or talking football with Henry, and after Henry died, he started dropping by to change light bulbs or check my smoke alarms. Brian would call me Mom with a practiced warmth that almost fooled me, but there was always a flicker of calculation behind his eyes when he looked at my house and my savings. Amanda fell hard and fast, and within a year they were married at a beachfront pavilion at Neptune Beach, where I watched my baby walk down the aisle in bare feet at sunset. I paid $10,000 toward the wedding because Henry and I had always promised we would support our daughter's milestones, and I didn't begrudge it even though I missed his steady hand. For the first 2 years of their marriage, they rented a small apartment on the south side and worked hard. but their spending habits began to outpace their income as Brian's business faltered. He had a knack for jumping from one scheme to the next, a pressure washing side hustle, then drop shipping patio furniture, then partnering with a cousin to rehab condos in Orlando. Meanwhile, Amanda stuck to her 9-to-5 schedule at St. Vincent's Medical Center, treating patients and doing continuing education, always paying her student loans on time and reminding Brian about their joint account. They began asking me for little things, a couple $100 to cover a rent hiccup, or to co-sign a used truck loan, each time promising it was temporary until his next big commission came through. I said no to co-signing because Henry had always told me never to mix family with financial risk, and I remembered friends who lost homes after guaranteeing their children's mortgages. Still, I helped with small emergencies, thinking that was what good mothers do, handing over checks drawn from my U.S. bank checking account and tracking the expenses in my ledger. I kept meticulous records, writing every deposit and withdrawal in a spiral notebook like my mother taught me, and I balanced the ledger every Sunday night with a calculator older than Amanda. I also updated my will after Henry died, naming Amanda as my primary beneficiary and leaving her our house, life insurance, and whatever cash remained after funeral expenses and small bequests to my church. I wanted her to be secure, to have the home she grew up in, and I assumed she would cherish it as much as I did when I dusted the baseboards at dawn. But over time, I noticed more friction in our conversations, like grit in a smooth engine. Brian began making jokes about me moving in with Amanda so they could watch me as I aged. He said it casually over barbecue on the patio, but his eyes flicked toward my house when he suggested I could sell it and use the proceeds to pay down their student loans. Amanda shushed him at first, but then she began echoing the same sentiment, talking about multi-generational living and how everyone does it now to save money on utilities and groceries. I politely reminded them that my independence was important to me and that Henry had built this home with his own hands on weekends while working 2 jobs. They laughed it off, and we moved on to dessert, but the tension simmered under the whipped cream, like a pot left on low heat. As the months turned into years, Brian's business ideas continued to flop, and I saw more and more credit card offers and late notices on their kitchen counter when I stopped by with casseroles. One afternoon, I noticed a Chase credit card statement with a balance over $8,000 and a note scribbled in Amanda's handwriting that said, "Call them again about the interest rate." My stomach tightened as I realized their financial troubles were deeper than they admitted, and I started to wonder if they were counting on my inheritance to bail them out. Still, I tried to stay in my lane, offering advice when asked and focusing on my own life, which included water aerobics at the YMCA and trips to Publix for fresh produce. I enjoyed my routines, from flipping through old photo albums with a cup of Folgers coffee to walking the neighborhood with my friend Sharon and gossiping about which houses were selling. We joked about gentrification and property values, but I never imagined my property would become the battleground for my daughter's marriage and my own sense of worth. Then came the night that changed everything, when I overheard Brian call me a burden and realized my place in their hearts had been reduced to a dollar figure. It was a humid Friday in April, and they had invited me over for dinner at their 2-bedroom rental, which smelled of scented candles and microwaved brown rice. Amanda poured wine into my glass and told me she had news to share, her eyes darting nervously to Brian, who rested his arm on the back of their discounted IKEA couch. I smiled and waited, thinking perhaps she was pregnant or had accepted a promotion. But my heart sank when she pulled a manila envelope out of her purse. She cleared her throat and said they had met with an attorney and drawn up documents to simplify the estate so that we could avoid probate and protect assets from nursing home costs. Brian chimed in, explaining that they wanted me to sign a quitclaim deed transferring my house into a joint revocable trust, with them named as trustees to manage assets in case of incapacity. He used big words he barely understood, but what he was really saying was that he wanted control of my home while I was still alive, under the guise of efficiency. I was not born yesterday, and I politely asked for time to review the documents and speak with my own attorney, which irritated Brian but prompted Amanda to put her hand on his knee. Later that evening, after washing the dishes and excusing myself to use their bathroom, I paused by the hallway to adjust a painting and heard their voices through the cracked bedroom door. Amanda whispered that she felt guilty for pushing me, and Brian responded with the line that would fuel my resolve. Your mother is a burden, and this is our only chance to get ahead. He spoke with a coldness I hadn't heard before, complaining about the cost of my medications and the fact that I still drove my car, as if independence were a sin. Amanda didn't defend me. She sighed and said, "Maybe you're right," and my heart shattered because my little girl, who once brought me dandelions, now viewed me as a financial obstacle. In that moment, standing barefoot on their hallway rug, I vowed I would never be anyone's burden, and I would teach them the cost of underestimating a woman who has nothing left to lose. I went home that night with my mind racing, the warm Florida air pressing against my cheeks as I drove past strip malls and quiet subdivisions, thinking about Henry and our promises. The next morning, I poured coffee into Henry's old mug, sat at the kitchen table, and flipped open the manila envelope, reading each line of the proposed trust with a highlighter in hand. It was filled with legal jargon, but clear enough. I would transfer my house into a trust, give Amanda and Brian authority to manage it, and limit my own ability to sell or refinance. My house would effectively be theirs on paper, leaving me dependent on their decisions, and there was no guarantee they wouldn't kick me out if times got tough. That Saturday, I pulled out my yellow pages and looked up elder law attorneys, circling 3 names before settling on a woman named Elaine, who had been recommended at my church potluck. When I called her office, her secretary squeezed me in for a consultation on Monday morning, instructing me to bring any documents and my existing will. I spent Sunday gathering everything: my original deed, Henry's death certificate, my will, my ledger, and a folder of bank statements from Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank, and my credit union. I also jotted down every memory of Brian's behavior that had raised red flags, from his odd questions about my accounts to his sudden interest in my property tax bill. On Monday, I walked into Elaine's small office in downtown Jacksonville, greeted by the scent of potpourri and the hum of a Keurig machine, feeling both nervous and empowered. Elaine was in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair, and she listened as I explained the proposed trust and repeated Brian's words through tight lips. She nodded sympathetically and then explained that Florida is a 2-party consent state, meaning that everyone involved must consent before a conversation can be legally recorded, which would be important if I needed evidence. She also warned me that if I share a property with my daughter or son-in-law, I cannot simply change the locks without a court order granting exclusive possession, because co-owners have equal rights to access the home. Her words were a sobering reminder that even though my name was on the deed, my children could complicate access if I signed anything haphazardly, and the law does not allow revenge disguised as eviction. Elaine suggested that I not sign the trust, that I update my will, and that I consider creating a living trust, naming a neutral trustee if I wanted to avoid probate. She also encouraged me to monitor my bank accounts for any unauthorized activity, because unscrupulous relatives sometimes take advantage of older relatives by adding themselves as joint owners or forging checks. That afternoon, after leaving Elaine's office with a folder of notes, I drove straight to my local U.S. bank branch to check on my accounts, and my stomach sank when the teller asked to speak privately. In a small cubicle, the branch manager told me that there had been a suspicious attempt to add Brian's name as a joint owner on my checking account the previous week, but the request was flagged for lack of documentation. My hands trembled as I realized that Brian had already tried to attach himself legally to my money, and I silently thanked the bank for following protocol. The manager explained that banks have a right to freeze or restrict accounts if they detect fraud or suspicious activity, and that if I suspected unauthorized access, I could request a temporary freeze while they investigated. I decided to open a new checking account under my name, only at another institution, transferring most of my funds to avoid any potential misuse, and I filed a fraud report with the bank. I also signed up for text alerts on my accounts so I would get notifications anytime money moved, a simple technology that gave me enormous peace of mind. That evening, I went home and changed my online banking passwords, updated my antivirus software, and closed any old credit cards I no longer used, like my Kohl's charge card from 15 years ago. I also set up a meeting with my financial advisor, a patient man at Edward Jones who had guided Henry and me through mutual funds and life insurance decisions. When we met, he explained the benefits of a revocable living trust and suggested I could name him or a bank as trustee to avoid family conflicts while retaining control during my lifetime. Meanwhile, I decided to play nice with Amanda and Brian while I gathered more information. I accepted their invitations for dinner, listened to their plans, and waited for the right moment. A few weeks later, I invited them over to my house for coffee and cinnamon rolls, determined to have an honest conversation about their intentions and my boundaries. We sat at the kitchen table where Amanda once did homework, and I told them I wasn't comfortable signing anything that transferred ownership of my house while I was still living. Brian's face tightened, but Amanda smiled weakly and said she understood my concerns. Still, I could feel the tension like static in the room, and I suspected they were not done. I offered them the cinnamon rolls anyway, pressing them into their hands as a gesture of goodwill. But I also noted the way Brian glanced at my ledger on the counter. When they left, I wrote down everything they had said and every glance that seemed telling, because I knew that memory is not always enough when you need to defend yourself. The next month, I received a letter from the county assessor stating that the assessed value of my house had risen from $190,000 to $225,000, and I almost laughed. My little ranch home had appreciated so much that it was now a tempting asset for people who saw dollar signs instead of wood siding and Christmas mornings. Around the same time, my neighbor across the street sold her house for $280,000 to a young couple from Atlanta, and the for sale sign disappeared within a week. These numbers buzzed in my ears like mosquitoes, reminding me that my house could easily fund a new start for Amanda and Brian, or a stable retirement for me, depending on who had control. One afternoon in July, I was sitting in my recliner watching Wheel of Fortune when my doorbell rang, and there stood a notary with papers for me to sign, sent by Amanda and Brian's attorney. I refused to sign, telling the notary I was not prepared to make such changes, and I called Elaine immediately to inform her of their continued pressure. Elaine advised me to document the incident and send Amanda and Brian a certified letter stating that I declined to participate in their trust and that all future communication should be directed through my attorney. I did as instructed, typing a letter on my old Dell computer, printing it on stationery I'd used for church newsletters, and mailing it via certified mail with a return receipt. Within days, Amanda called me in tears, accusing me of being cold and distant, but I gently reminded her that legal matters require clear boundaries and that I loved her enough to protect her from future arguments. Brian, however, sent an email dripping with sarcasm, accusing me of being manipulated by lawyers and threatening to challenge my will if I didn't reconsider. His words only strengthened my resolve. I printed the email, forwarded it to Elaine, and added another page to my growing file of evidence. At this point, I could have simply cut them off entirely, but I cared too much about Amanda to act rashly, so I formulated a plan that would both protect me and teach them a lesson. I decided to create a new living trust, leaving my house and assets to charity and a scholarship fund in Henry's name if Amanda and Brian continued to pressure me. But I kept this plan private. I also updated my will to include a clause that anyone contesting it would forfeit their inheritance, a common no contest clause that Elaine told me is enforceable in Florida. Weeks turned into months, and I maintained polite contact with Amanda and Brian, attending Amanda's birthday dinner at Outback Steakhouse and bringing a gift card from Target in a cheerful envelope. At dinner, I listened as Brian boasted about a new opportunity he had to buy distressed properties with investors from Miami, and he laughed at me for clipping coupons, calling me old-fashioned. I smiled and cut my steak carefully, but inside I was calculating the emotional distance between us, the gulf widening with each derogatory comment he made about people over 50. Later that week, I had a flat tire outside a Walgreens, and Brian didn't answer my call. Instead, I called AAA, and a polite young man named Jeremy changed my tire while I watched with gratitude. These small incidents affirmed that I could rely on myself and my community, not on a son-in-law who viewed me as baggage. When October rolled around, I called Amanda and Brian to invite them over for a family meeting, telling them I had an announcement about my estate and some documents for them to review. They arrived in matching jackets, slightly out of breath, and I could tell from Brian's clipped greeting that he expected good news. I led them into the living room where I had arranged photo albums, Henry's toolbox, and a large envelope with my new estate plan, along with a tray of oatmeal raisin cookies. After we sat down, I spoke slowly and clearly, explaining that I had consulted multiple professionals and decided to revise my estate plan in light of recent events and my desire to leave a positive legacy. I reminded them of Henry's and my values: hard work, kindness, and respect, and told them that I expected those values to be honored in any dealings with my property. I then handed them each a photocopy of a letter I planned to file with the probate court and our family attorney, stating that I had created a living trust with a neutral trustee and designated most of my estate to a scholarship fund and local charities. I watched their faces as they scanned the letter, Amanda's eyes filled with tears and confusion, while Brian's jaw clenched like he was grinding his teeth down to dust. He sputtered, asking how I could do this to family, accusing me of letting outsiders tell me what to do with my money, and claiming that Henry would be ashamed of me. I calmly responded that Henry would be proud of me for standing up for myself, for making thoughtful decisions, and for ensuring our life's work benefited others instead of financing reckless dreams. Amanda asked if she would receive anything, and I assured her she would still receive personal items, photo albums, heirlooms, and sentimental things, but not the house or large sums of money unless she demonstrated respect. Her face crumpled and she said, "I thought you trusted me." And I replied that trust is earned through actions, not assumed by blood. Brian jumped up, knocking over his chair, and shouted that he wouldn't let me ruin their future, to which I quietly reminded him that he had no legal standing to stop me from disposing of my assets. He threatened to contest the trust in court, and I politely pointed out that contesting the will would trigger the no contest clause, leaving him with nothing at all. Feeling cornered, he shouted that he would change my locks while I slept and claimed that I was unfit, and I told him that if he tried, the sheriff would escort him out because co-owners cannot change locks without a court order. I looked him in the eye and reminded him that banks can freeze accounts if suspicious activity is detected, and that forging signatures or unauthorized transfers could lead to criminal charges and account freezes. The room grew quiet as I placed a small porcelain teacup from my grandmother's china set on the coffee table and said, "If you insist on treating me like a burden, then this is all you will inherit." The teacup, delicate and priceless in sentiment, sat between us like a verdict, and for a moment even Brian seemed to understand the gravity of his actions. Amanda burst into tears, whispering apologies, but Brian stormed out of the house, slamming the front door so hard that Henry's framed fishing photo rattled on the wall. I held Amanda while she cried, her shoulders shaking like they did when she scraped her knee at age 6, and I whispered that I loved her enough to teach her this hard lesson. After she left, my house felt both empty and sacred. I walked through each room, touching the walls and thanking Henry for building a sanctuary that could withstand storms and betrayals. In the following weeks, Brian sent angry texts and emails threatening legal action, and I forwarded them all to Elaine, who documented them meticulously. He also attempted to call the bank to impersonate me again, but the bank had flagged my account, and all requests had to be made in person with identification, thwarting his attempts. By November, I decided to take my plan further and put my house on the market. I contacted a realtor recommended by my friend Mary and scheduled an appraisal. The appraiser walked through, complimenting Henry's craftsmanship and the updated kitchen appliances I had installed 2 years earlier, and he valued the house at $250,000. I knew then that selling would provide me with enough to buy a smaller condo and fund the scholarship I envisioned, so I signed listing papers and braced myself for the emotional roller coaster. I did not tell Amanda or Brian about the listing. I simply planted a for sale sign in the front yard on a crisp December morning and watched the neighborhood buzz begin. Within a day, Amanda called, her voice shaky, asking if I had lost my mind, and I calmly explained that I was exercising my right to sell my property while I still owned it outright. She begged me to reconsider, but I reminded her that I had given them chances to show respect and that my decision was final because my peace was worth more than their approval. I received multiple offers above asking within a week, and I accepted a cash offer from a family relocating from Ohio set to close in 30 days. As I packed boxes of photos, quilts, and Henry's tools, I felt waves of sadness and liberation, like leaving a job you loved but outgrew. Friends from church helped me pack, and my neighbor Sharon brought over a crock pot of chicken soup and a loaf of sourdough from Panera Bread to sustain us through the sorting. We laughed and cried as we wrapped ornaments in newspaper and uncovered Henry's old fishing tackle box, each item a memory weighed against the need for forward movement. Meanwhile, I toured condos and ultimately selected a 2-bedroom unit in a 55-plus community not far from the St. Johns River, with amenities like a community garden and shuffleboard courts. It felt like the right size for this new chapter. It had modern appliances, secure entry, and a sunroom where I could place my rocking chair and read in the afternoons. Closing day arrived, and I signed the deed transfer to the new buyers, tears slipping down my cheeks as I handed over the keys that Henry once sanded and stained. The wire transfer from the sale landed in my new account, and I felt a surge of empowerment as I watched the bank teller confirm the funds, her voice kind and professional. I immediately funded the scholarship at the local community college in Henry's name, establishing criteria for students pursuing electrical trades and aligning with his life's work. I also donated to my church's food pantry and a women's shelter, causes that mattered deeply to me, and I felt Henry's spirit nodding in approval. Around this time, I started receiving letters from Amanda, handwritten on stationery, apologizing for letting Brian influence her and begging me to reconsider my trust decisions. In her letters, she told me that she had left Brian after discovering he had been gambling online and carrying on an affair with a coworker, betraying not only me but her as well. My heart ached for her, but I felt a sense of vindication, knowing that my instincts had been right and that she would now understand the consequences of ignoring red flags. She wrote that Brian had threatened to sue me for undue influence, but that his own lawyer warned him he had no case because my documents were airtight and I was of sound mind. Court records would later show that he filed a petition, but withdrew it after his own attorney refused to represent him further without full payment, highlighting the reality that court dockets move slowly and require evidence, not emotions. During this time, I also experienced a wave of community support. Women at church pulled me aside to share stories of sons-in-law draining accounts, and they thanked me for speaking openly about finances. I spoke to a support group at the senior center, telling them about the importance of reviewing bank statements, understanding two-party consent laws, and never handing over access without a clear written plan. In those meetings, I learned that even though Florida is a two-party consent state, some neighbors in other states could record you without permission, so I always caution people to check their local laws. I also reminded them that banks can and will freeze accounts if they detect suspicious activity, leaving you unable to access funds until the investigation is complete, so vigilance is key. As the months passed, Amanda and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. She came over to my condo with flowers from Trader Joe's and tears in her eyes, apologizing again and hugging me long and hard. We talked for hours, sharing memories of Henry and clarifying boundaries, promising to communicate openly about money and to seek counseling together to heal our trust wounds. I insisted that any future conversations about estate planning involve a neutral third party, like my attorney or financial advisor, and Amanda agreed, her shoulders visibly relaxing. Brian's presence faded into the background of my life, like the hum of a refrigerator you don't notice until it stops, replaced by the hum of new friendships and opportunities. I joined a quilting group where we met at Panera after hours to stitch blankets for newborns, and I discovered joy in the small, repetitive motions of thread and conversation. I also signed up for Silver Sneakers classes at the gym, meeting other women who had similar stories of adult children mismanaging trust, and we laughed as we lifted tiny weights and shared our histories. One of my new friends, Margaret, told me she once found out her son was using her Social Security checks to pay for his Verizon cell phone plan, prompting her to take control of her accounts. These exchanges reminded me that my experience was not unique. Thousands of older adults face financial exploitation from those closest to them, often in silence, and I vowed to keep speaking up. I wrote a letter to the editor of our local paper, urging readers to educate themselves on wills, trusts, and state laws, and to set boundaries with loved ones before bitterness blooms. The letter sparked a small flurry of community responses, including an invitation from the county library to give a talk about estate planning, which I accepted, though public speaking made my palms sweat. At the event, I stood behind a podium in front of 15 people, my voice quivering at first, and I told my story, leaving out names but including the lessons that could help others. I explained how co-owners of a property cannot change locks without a court order, how banks protect you by freezing accounts when fraud is detected, and how Florida's two-party consent law prevents secret recordings. I stressed the importance of consulting attorneys and financial advisors because the law is a maze, and one wrong turn could cost you everything you worked for. After my talk, a man approached me with tears in his eyes, telling me his brother had pressured their mother to transfer the family farm, and he wished he had heard my advice earlier. Stories like his validated my decision to speak out, even though some neighbors whispered that I had aired dirty laundry. I learned that sunlight is the best disinfectant. Meanwhile, I decorated my new condo with the items I saved from my house: Henry's fishing photo, our wedding portrait, and a shadow box containing the keys to our first apartment. Each object anchored me, reminding me that my identity extends beyond any one property, and that home is something you carry in your heart and in the memories you share. I placed my grandmother's china in a glass cabinet, leaving one teacup on the shelf as a reminder of the day I drew my line in the sand. Whenever I looked at that cup, I felt a mix of sorrow and strength, knowing that sometimes love requires boundaries as firm as oak and as delicate as porcelain. The scholarship fund I established began awarding its first grants to students that spring, and I received handwritten thank you notes from young men and women excited to become electricians and line workers. Reading their letters made my heart swell. Each one felt like an echo of Henry's laugh and the hum of his bucket truck when he came home tired and proud. Financially, I was stable. My advisor had invested the proceeds from the house conservatively, and I lived comfortably on the interest and my Social Security, never wanting for anything but occasional company. I still shopped at Publix, still cut coupons clipped from the Sunday paper, and I occasionally treated myself to Starbucks when my quilting group met there, savoring a caramel macchiato like a teenager. I continued to drive my 12-year-old Toyota Corolla, which I maintained at Jiffy Lube and washed at the car wash down the street, feeling proud of its reliability. One day, as I was waiting for my car at the Jiffy Lube, a young woman approached me and asked if I was the lady who wrote that viral post about disinheriting her children. I laughed and confessed that it was probably me, and she hugged me, telling me her aunt had used my story to convince her husband to sign a fair prenup. Moments like these reminded me that every decision we make echoes beyond our own lives, shaping conversations and giving courage to strangers. During the holidays, Amanda and I spent Christmas Eve together at my condo, making sugar cookies and watching It's a Wonderful Life, both of us crying at the scene where friends gather to help George Bailey. She told me that she had started seeing a therapist to unpack her guilt and codependency, and I praised her for doing the hard work of growth, encouraging her to keep going. We exchanged simple gifts. She gave me a hand-knit scarf, and I gave her a framed photo of Henry holding her as a baby, reminding us of our roots. I also included a note promising that if she continued to respect my boundaries and demonstrate responsibility, I would consider leaving her a portion of my estate upon my passing, but only if she earned it. She nodded, tears shining, and promised to prove herself, and for the first time in years I believed her because she had taken action by leaving Brian and seeking help. In the years that followed, Amanda rebuilt her life, paying off debt, saving for her own home, and eventually buying a small townhouse with an FHA loan. She met a kind teacher named Luis, who valued honesty and stability, and they dated slowly, mindful of each other's past wounds and committed to communication. When they decided to marry, they invited me to coffee to share the news, and I hugged them both, blessing their union and offering to contribute to their honeymoon fund instead of paying for the wedding. I told Luis about Henry and our values, and he nodded respectfully, assuring me that he and Amanda intended to build a partnership based on mutual support and independence. Their wedding was small and beautiful, held under a live oak tree in a park, and I sat in the front row with my friend Sharon, wearing a pale blue dress and clutching a handkerchief. During the reception, Amanda thanked me publicly for teaching her the importance of boundaries and financial literacy, her voice breaking as she said she was grateful for my tough love. It was a moment I will never forget because it proved that sometimes the hardest choices we make for our children are the ones that save them from greater harm. After the wedding, I returned to my condo alone and sat on the sunroom sofa, sipping chamomile tea and feeling the presence of Henry like a warm weight on my shoulder. I spoke aloud to him, telling him about Amanda's growth and my own peace, and I felt the universe nod, the way the wind sometimes answers with a soft sigh. From time to time, I would see Brian's name in conversation. He eventually moved back to his hometown in Georgia and started selling used cars according to mutual acquaintances. I heard rumors that he had been sued by former business partners and had declared bankruptcy. And while I did not relish his misfortune, I believed that karma had a way of balancing accounts. Occasionally, the thought of him calling me a burden would flicker in my mind, and I would shake my head, grateful that I took action instead of letting that narrative define me. I learned that when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them the first time and adjust accordingly, even if that someone is family. I also learned that loyalty is not a blank check to be cashed by anyone who feels entitled, but a bond nourished by respect and reciprocal care. Years later, I continue to maintain my living trust, updating it with Elaine whenever circumstances change, and I feel secure knowing that my wishes are documented and my assets protected. I have also added a durable power of attorney and advanced health care directives, appointing trusted friends as my agents because I understand the importance of planning for incapacity. These documents give me peace of mind that if I am ever unable to make decisions, those decisions will reflect my values and not be left to chance or unscrupulous relatives. Every time I review my documents, I remember the lessons. Check your beneficiaries, know your state's consent laws, and never assume that love alone will protect you from exploitation. I also think about the bank policy I learned, that if a bank suspects fraud, it has the right to freeze your account without notice, and you may not have access to your funds until the investigation is completed. This reality underscores how precarious financial security can be and how important it is to monitor your accounts and to act quickly if something feels wrong. Sometimes while sipping tea in my sunroom, I recall the day I changed the locks on my old house after Amanda and Brian had moved out, waiting for the closing to finalize and feeling the deadbolt click. The locksmith had come at my request with proper identification, and I remembered Elaine's advice that I could change the locks only because I was the sole owner and had a sale pending. Otherwise, co-owners must have a court order. That sound of a new lock sliding into place was both literal and symbolic, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Now, when I think about keys, I think about how we assign them. I hold the keys to my own life, and I will hand them over only when I choose, with care and intention. There were other small victories along the way. The day I installed a Ring doorbell with my nephew's help, laughing at how far security systems had come since Henry's time, or the afternoon I baked banana bread with my neighbor's grandchildren, teaching them to cream butter and sugar, and thinking about how nurturing comes in many forms. Life is filled with these quiet moments where resilience grows, often unnoticed, like roots spreading under soil, preparing to hold you firm when storms come. Looking back, my journey from being called a burden to reclaiming my autonomy taught me that being underestimated can become a source of strength if you choose to rise instead of retreat. It showed me that legal knowledge and financial literacy are not just for the wealthy, but are vital tools for anyone who wants to protect their hard-earned security. It also deepened my empathy for others facing similar trials, inspiring me to volunteer at a local legal aid clinic where I help seniors fill out power of attorney forms and understand their rights. At the clinic, I often meet grandmothers who hesitate to say no to grandchildren asking for money, and I gently remind them that boundaries are not cruelty, but love in action. We sip coffee from styrofoam cups and talk about life, and I watch their shoulders lift as they realize they are not alone and they have permission to prioritize their well-being. Sometimes I share my favorite motif from my story, that of the kitchen table, and I remind them that decisions made there with calm and clarity can shape destinies. I also share a laugh about modern technology, telling them that I learned to set up my smartphone to receive transaction alerts, and that if I can do it, anyone can. One of them asked me once how I found the strength to sell my house and cut off my own daughter temporarily, and I told her that pain becomes purpose when you channel it toward justice. I said that the love I had for Amanda didn't weaken when I told her no. It strengthened because it was rooted in honesty, like pruning a tree to help it bear healthier fruit. Her eyes widened, and she told me she would go home and have a difficult conversation with her son, and I hugged her, wishing her courage. Back at home, my days settle into a peaceful rhythm of early morning walks by the river, midday quilting, and evenings filled with phone calls to friends and family. Amanda calls me at least once a week now, sometimes from her car after work, or sometimes from her couch while stirring a pot of chili, and we talk about everything from politics to recipes. She tells me about her patients, about the joys and frustrations of healthcare, and I listen, offering motherly advice only when she asks, leaving her space to be an adult. She also keeps me updated about Luis and their home repairs, sending photos of their new backsplash or their rescue dog curled up on the sofa, and I smile at these glimpses of her contentment. Occasionally, we visit the cemetery together, leaving flowers at Henry's grave and sitting quietly while birds flit between the headstones, our shared grief now softened into gratitude. In those moments, we don't talk about Brian or money. We simply hold hands and remember the man who taught us resilience with his calloused hands and gentle smile. Life continues to throw challenges, of course. When the pandemic swept through, I learned to order groceries online from Instacart and have them delivered to my condo, marveling at modern convenience. I also learned to use Zoom for church services and quilting meetings, which sometimes froze mid-prayer or mid-stitch, leading to giggles and patience. Even after the pandemic eased, I kept some of those habits, enjoying the convenience of curbside pickup at Walmart when I didn't feel like wandering aisles, though I missed chatting with the produce manager. Technology kept me connected and safe, and I realized that adaptation is not just for the young. We can all learn new tricks if the desire is there. As for finances, I became more confident in reading investment statements, asking questions, and advocating for myself, something I once deferred to Henry. I learned to navigate Medicare supplemental plans, choose between Part D drug coverage options, and compare rates on home insurance, always mindful of the fine print. This attention to detail spilled over into other areas. I read more books, including legal thrillers and memoirs, and I attended a night class on estate planning offered by a local lawyer. At the class, I saw younger couples take notes and ask questions, and I was glad they were learning early, because knowledge is a gift we can give ourselves. Sometimes I would drive past my old neighborhood, glancing at my former house now painted a cheerful blue, and I would smile at the children's toys in the yard. I felt no regret, only gratitude that another family was making memories there, and I silently wished them respect and honesty at their kitchen table. Returning to my condo, I would unlock my door and breathe in the scent of vanilla candles, grateful for the roof overhead that I chose, not one chosen for me. The world is unpredictable, and the only control we truly have is over our decisions. I decided to choose boundaries, self-respect, and generosity on my terms. That is why when my daughter's husband called me a burden, I responded not with tears but with action, not with anger but with strategy. I followed the law, consulted experts, documented everything, and ensured that my assets would not become weapons used against me or my values. I also trusted in the processes we have, banks that freeze suspicious accounts, courts that require evidence and follow due process, and laws that protect property rights and privacy. These systems aren't perfect, but with vigilance and advocacy, they serve as shields for those of us who might otherwise be taken advantage of by people we love. If you are listening to my story and nodding, feeling that sting of being called a burden, I want you to know that your worth is not measured by how useful others find you. Your worth is inherent, woven into every meal you cooked, every bill you paid, every time you stayed up late caring for someone else, and no one can put a dollar amount on that. If you suspect someone is taking advantage of you, speak up, find help, and remember that protecting yourself is not selfish. It is an act of dignity. I am not suggesting you cut off your loved ones at the first sign of conflict. Relationships require compromise, but compromise is not capitulation. Set boundaries, ask questions, sign nothing without review, and maintain control over your assets until you are satisfied that your wishes will be respected. Know your state's consent laws if you need to record a conversation. Know your bank's policies about account freezes and suspicious activity, and know your rights as a homeowner or tenant. And if all else fails, remember my grandmother's teacup. A simple object can carry a message louder than 100 speeches when placed with intention. My story may seem dramatic, but the drama lies not in the inheritance or the money, but in the quiet decisions we make, the letters we send, and the documents we sign. It is about reclaiming your narrative when others try to write you as a footnote, and about finding peace even when relationships fracture. Some nights when the crickets sing outside my window and the moonlight casts soft shadows, I whisper to Henry that we made it, that our home turned into scholarships and wisdom. I fall asleep knowing that I honored his memory by standing up for myself, and that our story might inspire others to do the same. If you found value in my tale, I invite you to share your own experiences in the comments below, because our stories create a tapestry stronger than any single thread. Tell me where you are listening from, what chores or hobbies you are doing, and whether you have ever navigated the delicate balance between family loyalty and self-preservation. We are a community of resilient hearts, and together we can learn from one another, support one another, and ensure that no one feels alone or voiceless. I will continue to read your comments, respond when I can, and take comfort knowing that sharing my vulnerability helps someone else stand a little taller. When you leave your comment, mention whether you knew about two-party consent states or bank account freezes, and share any tips you have for protecting yourself financially. Perhaps you can tell me about a time you enforced a boundary and how it changed your relationships, or about a pattern you interrupted to preserve your peace. I love hearing about small victories, whether it is learning how to use a new app to manage your money, or finally telling a pushy relative no with a steady voice. I also hope you will share this video with friends and family who may need a nudge to review their wills, update beneficiaries, or simply start a conversation about aging with dignity. Too often these topics are whispered about in back rooms, leaving older adults in the dark, but transparency is our ally and secrets our enemy. People like Brian thrive on secrecy and complacency. Shining light on their tactics takes away their power and gives it back to those who deserve it. On a lighter note, I will tell you that since moving, I discovered a new love for gardening herbs on my small balcony, tending basil and rosemary in pots bought from Home Depot. The scent fills my kitchen when I cook, reminding me that growth happens in confined spaces too, not just in sprawling yards. I also adopted a rescue cat named Ginger from the local Humane Society, a calico who curls up on my lap and purrs like a tiny engine, offering unconditional companionship. Every morning she follows me to the coffee maker, weaving around my ankles as if to say good morning, and I laugh at the simple joy of another living being's presence. Ginger taught me that love can arrive unexpectedly and fill spaces that once felt empty, and that healing often comes through nurturing something outside yourself. She also reminds me of the importance of play. I watch her chase a laser pointer across the rug and realize that even at my age, it is healthy to find moments of childlike delight. Sometimes I imagine telling Henry about Ginger, about the scholarship, about Amanda's growth, and I picture his eyes crinkling at the edges, proud and amused. I know that he would have supported my decisions because he always said that leaving a legacy isn't about wealth, but about the values you instill in those who survive you. He often told Amanda, "Money can be replaced, trust cannot," a phrase I wrote in my journal and one that guided me through the darkest days of this saga. It is a lesson I now pass on to you. Hold tight to trust. Be generous with forgiveness, but guard your bank account with the vigilance of a hawk. One night I dreamed of a courtroom. The judge, wearing bifocals, asked me to explain why I had changed my will, and I calmly recited every instance of manipulation, every bank alert, every disrespectful remark. In the dream, the judge nodded, stamped his approval, and handed me a set of keys engraved with words like boundaries and courage, a symbolic gesture that made me smile when I awoke. Dreams aside, actual courtrooms are less dramatic but just as important. They rely on paperwork, timelines, and procedure, which is why I always tell people to keep copies and date everything. When Brian threatened to sue, my preparation and documentation meant that Elaine could respond with facts, while his bluster fell apart under scrutiny. Court dockets may be months out, as I learned when Amanda filed for divorce and had to wait for a hearing, but persistence and patience can outlast the storms of desperation. I also want to mention the unsung heroes in my story, the bank tellers, attorneys, friends, and strangers who offered advice, hugs, and resources without judgment. They were like stepping stones across a river, each one carrying me a little further to safety, and I am grateful for their presence in my life. We often think we have to solve everything alone, but community is a powerful antidote to manipulation and fear. Now that you know the full journey, perhaps you can see that my decision to blow the inheritance was not spiteful but strategic, a way to redirect energy towards something positive. I took what could have been a battleground and turned it into a garden of opportunities for others, and in doing so, I found peace. Even though my daughter's husband called me a burden, I learned that I could transform that pain into purpose. and I hope you will remember that if someone belittles you. My revenge was not loud or flashy. It was deliberate, legal, and grounded in love for myself and for the community I could help. As I bring my story to a close, I want to thank you for listening to every detail, from the smell of cinnamon rolls to the click of a new lock. Writing and sharing this has been both cathartic and purposeful, and knowing that my words may empower you brings me joy. If you are still here, please consider leaving a comment with your thoughts, questions, and experiences, because our conversation doesn't end when this video fades to black. I plan to read them, respond when possible, and perhaps even incorporate your stories into future talks, because we are all teachers and students in the school of life. If you found this helpful, you can also like the video and subscribe for more stories like mine, though your presence and participation are what matter most to me. Remember, we may be mothers, grandmothers, retirees, or professionals, but we are not burdens. We are pillars, and pillars do not crumble under petty insults. We stand tall because we have weathered storms, raised families, paid mortgages, and built communities, and we deserve respect and autonomy. Even if your story looks different than mine, I hope you see yourself in my journey and feel affirmed in your right to protect your heart and home. I have always believed that dignity is not given but claimed, like a flag planted firmly in the ground of your own soul. If someone tries to take that flag, you can hold on tighter, move it if necessary, or plant another elsewhere, but never leave it unattended. This narrative has been long, and perhaps you listened while folding towels or taking a walk, but I hope the time passed quickly as you pictured kitchens, courtrooms, and keys. I tried to weave details and emotions because life is both numbers on a ledger and tears on a cheek, both bank alerts and hugs at funerals. In the end, what matters is not the size of our inheritance, but the integrity of our actions and the love we leave behind. Thank you again for spending this time with me. I look forward to hearing from you and continuing the conversation, because our stories together can create waves of change. As I record these final words, Ginger curls up beside me and purrs, and I know that right now, in this small sunroom, I am exactly where I am meant to be. After I finished writing my story, I sat back in my chair and let the memories wash over me, the good and the bad, like waves against a familiar shore. I realized there were still threads to pull, small details that might help you, so I decided to include them here as an appendix of sorts, a pattern interrupt to keep your mind engaged. For example, you might wonder how I managed my medications and health care throughout this turmoil, given Brian's complaints about my medical expenses. I am fortunate to be in good health, but I do take blood pressure medication and cholesterol pills, which I fill at CVS, where the pharmacists know my name and always double-check interactions. I signed up for Medicare Part D with a provider recommended by AARP, and I review my coverage every year during open enrollment to make sure my prescriptions are still covered at the lowest cost. I also joined a prescription savings program, saving a few dollars here and there, because small savings add up when you are on a fixed income. Managing healthcare and finances simultaneously can be overwhelming, but breaking tasks into small, manageable steps helps. For instance, I schedule bill paying for the same day each month and keep a list on my refrigerator. Another detail you might appreciate: when I sold my house, I insisted on using a reputable title company to handle the closing, ensuring that the funds were transferred securely and that there were no liens. The title officer explained every line of the HUD statement, and I asked questions even if they seem naive, because confusion can be costly. Regarding taxes, I consulted a certified public accountant to understand capital gains exemptions. As my primary residence for over 25 years, I qualified for the full exemption, which saved me tens of thousands in taxes. These professional services were an investment in peace of mind, and I included them in my budget the same way I budget for groceries and car maintenance. Speaking of budgeting, one tool I love is a simple cash envelope system for discretionary spending. I withdraw a set amount each month for entertainment, dining out, and gifts, and when the envelope is empty, I stop spending. This system keeps me honest and prevents me from mindlessly swiping a debit card. It also gives me a tactile sense of money that digital numbers often obscure. When Amanda asked how I was able to budget so well, I showed her my envelopes and my spreadsheet, and she laughed, admitting that she relied too heavily on credit cards. She has since started her own version of the envelope system, though she uses a phone app to track categories, and I am proud of her for taking steps toward better financial health. Another habit that served me well was keeping a detailed file of my passwords and account numbers, stored securely in a fireproof safe along with my will, trust, and insurance policies. I update this file every 6 months and leave instructions with my attorney about how to access it in case of emergencies, ensuring that Amanda will not struggle to find paperwork when I pass. On the topic of insurance, I maintain homeowners insurance on my condo and an umbrella policy to cover liability because accidents happen and lawsuits are expensive. I also keep my car insured through State Farm, the same company Henry chose decades ago, and while premiums rise, I shop around every few years to make sure I'm getting a fair rate. These are the mundane details that underpin financial stability. They may not be glamorous, but they protect you from a single event wiping out years of savings. A few of you might be curious about my love life. After Henry died, I dated a man named Tom briefly, a retired fireman with a booming laugh, but it fizzled when we realized we wanted different things. Tom wanted to travel the country in an RV, while I wanted to stay rooted near my daughter and community. So we hugged, wished each other well, and remained friends. Since then, I have not pursued romantic relationships. I have filled my life with friendships, volunteering, and hobbies, and I am content. If love finds me again, I will welcome it. But I am not lonely. Ginger snores loudly enough to fill the empty spaces, and my friends keep my calendar full. Another pattern interrupt for you. I have begun learning Spanish through the Duolingo app, motivated by Luis's family and the desire to connect with a wider world. Each morning I spend 15 minutes practicing vocabulary, and I delight in being a student again at 73, proving that you can teach an old dog new tricks. Amanda laughs at my accent, but she encourages me and occasionally quizzes me over text, which is both challenging and bonding. Learning a new language exercises my brain, and it also reminds me that the world is vast, and that my story is one of millions happening simultaneously. Another thing I did after moving into my condo was to take a basic self-defense class for seniors, offered at the community center by a retired police officer. He taught us situational awareness, how to say no firmly, and even a few simple moves to break free if someone grabs you, skills that build confidence. I encourage everyone to take such a class because physical safety complements financial and emotional safety. Together, they create a foundation for independence. You might also like to know about the hobbies that keep me grounded. Besides quilting, I enjoy genealogy and have spent hours on Ancestry.com building my family tree. Tracing my ancestors back to Ireland in the 1800s connects me to a lineage of resilience, reminding me that hardships and triumphs are part of the human experience. In my research, I discovered a great-great-grandmother who once fought to keep her family farm from creditors, and I felt a kinship with her across the centuries. I printed her story and added it to my scrapbook, drawing inspiration from her courage when I faced my own legal battles. Collecting stories of ancestors also helps me contextualize my own decisions. I am not the first woman in my family to stand up against injustice, and I will not be the last. One day Amanda asked to see the family tree, and we spent an afternoon flipping through documents, learning about our forebears, and feeling the threads that tie us to them. In exploring the past, we healed the present, finding pride in our heritage and committing to continue the legacy of strength and fairness. As you can see, my life after the inheritance drama was rich and layered. It was not defined solely by conflict, but also by growth, learning, and community. It is important for me to share this because sometimes a big dramatic story overshadows the everyday joys that sustain us, and I want you to hear about both. In the spirit of transparency, I will also admit that I spent one indulgent afternoon at a spa, treating myself to a facial and massage at a local day spa after the house sold. I had never done anything like that before, and as the esthetician smoothed lavender lotion across my skin, I felt decades of stress melt away. Self-care does not have to be expensive, but occasionally splurging on yourself can remind you that you are deserving of comfort and pleasure, not just obligations. When I told Amanda about my spa day, she grinned and said, "You deserve it, Mom," a small moment of affirmation that felt like a hug. Speaking of hugs, one of the best pieces of advice I received from my therapist was to hug myself literally, wrapping my arms around my body when I felt anxious, to release oxytocin and calm my nerves. It seemed silly at first, but on nights when old fears surfaced, I would sit in bed, hug myself, and breathe deeply until my heart rate steadied. Mental health is just as important as financial health, and seeking therapy or counseling is not a weakness, it is courage. If you are struggling with anxiety, depression, or trauma, please reach out to a professional, a hotline, or a trusted friend because you deserve support. Another small tip: keep a gratitude journal. Every night I write down 3 things I am grateful for, which helps shift my focus from worry to appreciation. It might be as simple as a warm cup of tea, a kind word from a cashier at Costco, or a sunbeam through the window, but these small moments accumulate into a sense of well-being. In sharing these details, I hope to illustrate that resilience is built in layers. Legal preparation, financial literacy, emotional support, physical safety, and mental health all weave together. Perhaps you can think of your own resilience as a quilt, with each skill or support as a square. Some squares may be brightly patterned, others plain, but together they make a sturdy covering. If any of your squares are missing, like if you don't know your state's consent laws or if you haven't updated your will, consider this your invitation to start sewing. One day, many years after the dust settled, I sat with my friend Sharon on her porch swing, sipping lemonade, and she asked if I would do anything differently. I thought for a moment and said that if I had known earlier how important documentation was, I would have started saving emails and writing notes sooner, but otherwise I would follow the same path. She nodded, then shared that she had updated her will after hearing my story, leaving her estate equally among her grandchildren and including a clause to prevent contests. Hearing that my experience had prompted positive change in someone else's life made me smile. It made the pain feel purposeful. I continued to speak at local libraries and senior centers, sometimes with Amanda by my side to share her perspective on being on the receiving end of tough love. Together we presented a united front, showing that families can heal after conflict if everyone is willing to learn and respect boundaries. I will never forget one event where an elderly man raised his hand and asked Amanda if she resented me for changing my will, and she shook her head and said, "No, it saved me." Hearing those words brought me to tears because they encapsulated the paradox of love. Sometimes the most compassionate act looks like rejection from the outside. After that talk, a young woman approached us and said she planned to talk to her father about his will that very weekend. I wished her courage and clarity. Moments like these continue to happen. Stories beget stories, and each one adds to the collective wisdom we share. Since I'm sharing practical tips, let me mention one more. Review beneficiary designations on your life insurance policies and retirement accounts regularly, because these override wills and trusts. I discovered an outdated beneficiary designation on Henry's old retirement account, which could have caused problems if I hadn't updated it after his death, so don't neglect this step. Also, keep a folder of passwords and digital accounts. If you manage social media, online bills, or even loyalty programs, someone you trust should know how to access or close them if something happens to you. Digital assets are a newer frontier in estate planning, and we must evolve our habits to include them, just as we evolved from ledgers to spreadsheets. I also recommend setting up trusted contacts on your Apple ID or Google account, which allows someone you choose to access your data after your death, preserving photos and memories. Moving from digital to culinary, I want to share a recipe with you. My favorite banana bread that I baked during stressful days. You mix 3 ripe bananas, 2 eggs, half a cup of sugar, a splash of vanilla, a stick of melted butter, and a cup and a half of self-rising flour. Bake at 350 degrees for an hour. The smell will fill your home with comfort, and if you're willing, you can drop a loaf off at your bank or attorney's office as a thank you for their help. Food, like stories, brings people together and softens hard conversations, whether you are discussing wills or budgets. Once, after a particularly tense meeting with Amanda and Brian, I baked banana bread and brought it to my neighbor, who hugged me and said it tasted like heaven on a rainy day. Small kindnesses like loaves of bread or handwritten notes have a ripple effect. They remind us that we are not defined by conflict alone. Another pattern interrupt. My brief foray into painting classes at the community center, where I discovered that watercolor is unforgiving yet liberating. My first painting looked like a muddy puddle, but the instructor encouraged me to keep going, and by the 4th class I had painted a passable beach scene. Painting taught me that perfection is overrated, and that the process itself can be therapeutic, much like journaling or telling stories. I now have a small collection of paintings leaning against my closet wall, and I plan to frame one and hang it in my sunroom, a testament to trying new things. Trying new things also extended to travel. Once the pandemic eased, Amanda and I took a road trip to Savannah, Georgia, where we strolled cobblestone streets and ate pralines by the river. We toured old mansions, marveled at wrought iron gates, and talked about how different life would be if Henry were still here, letting ourselves feel both gratitude and longing. That trip deepened our bond and created new memories, reminding us that life continues beyond trauma and that joy is worth pursuing. On the drive home, we listened to country music and sang along, our voices scratchy and off-key, and we laughed until tears ran down our cheeks. I treasure those silly moments as much as the serious ones, because they are part of the mosaic of a full life. Another brand mention: while on the road, we stopped at a Cracker Barrel for breakfast, and I smiled at the nostalgia of rocking chairs on the porch and jars of candy lining the gift shop. We split an order of biscuits and gravy and browsed the shop, picking up a jar of apple butter for later, a small indulgence that tasted like autumn. We also filled up our tank at a Shell gas station, using Amanda's rewards points to save 10 cents per gallon, proof that small savings still mattered to us. Back at home, I continued my routine of thrifty shopping, using coupons at Winn-Dixie and scanning my loyalty card at CVS, because frugality is a habit, not a mood. One could argue that these details are trivial compared to disinheriting a child, but I believe that how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. The big decisions are built on countless small ones, like choosing to brew coffee at home instead of buying it daily, or deciding to watch a free concert at the park instead of paying for tickets. These small choices compound, creating a cushion that allows you to weather financial storms and invest in experiences that matter. In my case, the cushion funded not only my living expenses, but also charitable giving, travel, and the occasional spa day, and I don't regret one penny spent on joy. One more pattern interrupt. If you knit or crochet, consider making blankets for NICU babies or hats for cancer patients. These acts of service are deeply rewarding. I have lost count of the baby hats I have knit while watching Hallmark movies, but each one carries a wish for warmth and comfort. Service connects us to others and reminds us that we have value beyond our bank accounts, a truth I clung to when Brian called me a burden. Another suggestion: join a book club. Discussing novels with others sharpens critical thinking, introduces you to new perspectives, and fosters community. My book club meets monthly at the library, and we rotate between fiction and nonfiction. Our recent selection was a memoir about resilience, which spurred lively discussion about forgiveness. Through these clubs, I've met people younger and older than me, bridging generational gaps, and learning that many themes, like betrayal, redemption, and growth, are universal. I also met a retired judge who confirmed that no judge would grant a spouse exclusive possession of a home without evidence of danger or hardship, reinforcing Elaine's earlier advice. He told me that the court system seeks fairness but is bound by statutes and precedent, so representation matters, and I silently thanked Elaine for her guidance. It is surreal to think about how a chance meeting at a book club could validate my decisions years after they were made, but life is full of such surprises. When I reflect on this, I realize that staying engaged with the world through classes, clubs, and volunteering opens doors you never expected to walk through. It also keeps your network wide, which can be crucial when you need advice or support. Isolation makes you vulnerable, while community makes you strong. Therefore, my final advice to you is to cultivate relationships, both personal and professional, because one day a conversation over coffee or on a porch swing may save you. Talk to your neighbors, attend town hall meetings, get to know your banker and your lawyer, and be the type of person who not only asks for help, but offers it. If you are still listening, I applaud you. Your curiosity and commitment to learning suggests that you will apply these lessons and perhaps share them with others. As we approach the end of this very long story, I hope your cup of tea or coffee has been refilled and that your hands have been busy doing something satisfying. In the comments, tell me what you were doing while listening. Were you baking banana bread, folding laundry, walking your dog, or perhaps knitting hats for newborns? These details not only warm my heart, but also create a tapestry of shared experiences across cities and states, reminding us of our common humanity. To the younger viewers, I say, take note of these lessons early. You may think old age is far away, but planning now will save you headaches later. To my peers and elders, I say, it is never too late to take control of your life. Your children may be grown, but your story is far from over. I think of my grandmother, who at 70 learned to drive because she was tired of asking neighbors for rides to church. Independence has no expiration date. I also think of the women I meet at the gym who start weightlifting in their 60s to strengthen their bones. It is never too late to build muscle, physical or metaphorical. In my case, I built the muscle of self-advocacy, and though it was sore at first, it grew stronger with each repetition of saying no when necessary. The first time you set a boundary is the hardest, but each subsequent time reinforces your resolve and teaches others how to treat you. Eventually, boundaries become second nature, like locking your door at night. You don't think twice because you know it protects you. If someone reacts negatively to your boundary, remember that their reaction is about their expectations, not your value. Resist the temptation to apologize for doing what is right for you. Politeness is important, but self-betrayal is too high a price to pay for approval. Also remember that boundaries can evolve. What was appropriate when your children were 10 may not be when they are 40, and that is okay. Communicate changes clearly. Update documents and revisit your plans every few years or after major life events like marriages, divorces, and births. I updated my will after Henry's death, after Amanda's marriage, and after her divorce. Each time the adjustments reflected new realities. Similarly, I changed beneficiaries on my life insurance when Amanda remarried Luis, adding him as a contingent beneficiary because I trust him. These decisions reflect my values and my current relationships. What matters is that they were intentional, not reactive. I encourage you to be equally intentional with your life. Think about what legacy you want to leave, who you want to help, and how you can protect your wishes. Talk about these topics with your family. If they resist, try again later or involve a neutral third party to facilitate the conversation. There may be tears, misunderstandings, and even anger, but avoiding the conversation altogether leaves room for assumptions and resentment. I would rather face a difficult discussion than have my loved ones fight in court after I'm gone, unsure of what I wanted. After all, we write wills not for ourselves, but for the people we leave behind. to give them clarity, and to minimize conflict. If my story motivates you to call an attorney tomorrow, then it has served its purpose. If it simply comforts you on a lonely evening, it has also served its purpose. Stories are multi-purpose tools. They teach, they soothe, they warn, and they connect. I hope this one has done all of those for you, and perhaps even made you smile at times. As I close, I want to remind you that being labeled a burden is not a reflection of your worth, but of the speaker's character. You are not a burden. You are a human being with a lifetime of experiences, skills, and stories, and you deserve to be treated with dignity. My revenge was not to hurt those who hurt me, but to ensure that my life's work would not be misused, and to teach a lesson to the ones I love. In doing so, I found freedom, not just from financial manipulation, but from the fear of being unwanted. Freedom tastes like banana bread fresh from the oven, like a check with your name on it, like the click of a lock you chose to install. It looks like a scholarship certificate bearing your husband's name, like a cat curled at your feet, like a daughter who calls and means it. So if you are standing at your own metaphorical hallway, listening to someone call you a burden, take a breath, collect your thoughts, and plan your response. Speak to professionals, gather documents, and trust yourself. Your story might not mirror mine, but the principles remain. Respect yourself, protect your assets, and choose your legacy. Whatever you decide, know that you have support. This community is here to cheer you on, to offer advice, and to remind you that you are not alone. If you know someone who might benefit from hearing this, share it with them. You never know whose life you might change by passing along a story. There is power in sharing, and there is power in silence, too. Choose when to speak and when to listen, and both will serve you. Finally, thank you one more time for lending me your ears and hearts. Telling my story has been a gift, and receiving your attention is a blessing. I will sign off now, but before I go, I leave you with this. The next time you sip tea or coffee, raise your cup to yourself and whisper, "I am worthy." Because you are, and because sometimes the person who needs to hear that most is you. Take care, be well, and remember, boundaries are love, clarity is kindness, and your legacy is yours to shape. Until our paths cross again, may your days be filled with laughter, may your bank statements be balanced, and may your keys always lead to doors you are proud to open. Goodbye for now, dear listener, and thank you for spending your precious time with me. Please don't forget to comment below. I truly enjoy reading your stories and learning from this amazing community we are building together. This is Diane signing off with gratitude, courage, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I turned a moment of disrespect into a legacy of love.